Welcome to Underworld Ascendant, a closely related spiritual successor to the influential Ultima Underworld games. It takes heavy inspiration from the design philosophy of Ultima Underworld, a game design archetype sometimes known as the Immersive Sim. You might be familiar with this from the likes of System Shock, Deus Ex, Dishonored, or Prey. To quickly summarize the Immersive Sim in layman's terms, it's a video game design philosophy or genre focusing on the player's freedom. The player is plopped into a level with a set of tools, gadgets, and abilities, and is told to find or do something. The way the player accomplishes their goals is completely up to them from there. The player's toolset is typically embodied by multi-purpose tools, abilities, and gadgets that all allow for stealth, combat, and exploration. A grenade isn't just for crowd control. It's a heavy-duty lockpick, a mine, a noisemaker, something to play catch with, maybe even a platform. Player creativity is a key idea. All of these ideas are summed up in buzzwords like player agency, interacting systems, and emergent gameplay. The definition varies a surprising amount from person to person, but the commonly accepted definition is that the game requires those three aforementioned things to truly be an immersive sim. I personally place extra emphasis on level design, since good level design gives players the freedom, means, and challenge they need to encourage inventiveness. Back onto the game itself, Underworld Ascendant was developed by Otherside Studios, where many of the design choices evidently came from someone's other side. Despite that, they had some legendary talent on their side, such as Warren Spector, the inventor of the genre himself. Ascendant was highly panned upon release for being a buggy slog and is often heralded as the worst immersive sim ever made. Nearly 3 years down the line, I'm visiting this game personally to see how true that is and if there's anything redeemable about it. Also, I just want to play another immersive sim such as so few of these, so let's go. The game starts off with character creation, but it's really limited. You just pick some physical features and a voice, which will always be female if you choose male, hilariously. Once you're done with that, you're plopped right in and introduced to the plot, which is very weak. You've heard this exact fantasy tripe before. An ancient evil guy's about to awake, and you have to find the 7 keys before he wakes up and starts eternal reign of kicking puppies and pushing old ladies over. There's also 3 joinable Vine factions who also want to defeat the bad guy, but they don't matter at all. More later. I'm barely going to talk about the story from this point on because I cared so little about it. The tutorial does at least introduce all of the game's core mechanics succinctly, such as combat, fire, runes, stealth, throwing objects, etc. It's a rather boring and handheld tutorial, though that's surprisingly rather common for this genre. Almost every single mechanic introduced on this level has immediate problems, and the game is vague on more specific mechanics. Some problems are alleviated by progression through the game, but more problems crop up in their place anyways. The tutorial is not a great first impression, and I ditched the game later on in it my first time around. It just didn't leave that much of an impression on me. Before I can properly talk about the actual gameplay mechanics, I must discuss a mechanic that underlies almost everything you do, the Feats system. This is effectively the game's skill system. Instead of traditional level ups, you have to complete specific non-repeatable challenges in order to get skill points. Completing a fight without taking any damage, for instance, will get you a skill point the first time you do it. You can then trade these skill points in at a merchant in the hub town. You get 3 branches of perks, each representing traditional RPG archetypes: warrior, mage, and rogue. This is an extremely overwhelming screen the first time, but it's not too bad once you've invested some points and you know what you want to do. The perk design is actually quite a bit above average in this game. Most perks give you new abilities, moves, and gimmicks. They're rarely just dull and mechanical stat increases. Something important this game doesn't tell you is that each day that passes gives you a skill point. Days pass as you turn in quests, so if you do a handful of side quests on top of the main quest, you'll get 20 or so of these points in total. However, that doesn't detract from the problems presented by feats themselves. The feat challenges are incredibly specific, limited in number, and may not even be possible for certain characters. If you build your character as a Skyrim-style stealth archer, God forbid, then when are you ever going to do 10,000 damage with maces? Adhering to a specific playstyle could lock you out of a lot of feats, but a large number of feats can only be done if you have a specific perk in the first place. In order to perform the Pari feat, for instance, you need to take the Pari perk, which is not free, and would also be of no use to any stealth or magical characters. There's no option to respec or anything like that. Your perk choices are final. You almost need to try and min-max since there's not many feat points in the first place. Even with pretty decent optimization, I was still not able to fully fill out my mage tree alone. This game encourages you to be versatile, but then turns tail and locks valuable perk points behind specific perks. It also encourages you to ghost missions or beat them using only your fists. At the end of most missions, you get rank based on your versatility, which gives you some bonus cash. Later on, I realized that this was an absolute pittance, but even so, why indirectly punish players for adhering to a certain playstyle when the game is built around the idea of player freedom? If I want to clear a mission by slashing and burning everything in sight, that's really my own business. Plus, if I invest in magic in the first place, I want to use magic instead of bows, stealth, or maybe even melee weapons. So why are there so many feats for melee and just so few for magic or even stealth? The feat system as a whole is a quick giveaway if this game is confused, but that's just the start. There's more problems with the system that aren't obvious at a glance, and I'll address them in more detail soon. So let's go back to the tutorial. How's the melee combat? It's, well, janky. The first combat encounter in the game makes almost every problem with the melee combat abundantly clear. To summarize, enemies are damage sponges, attacks don't have much oomph, enemies sometimes get ragdoll launched for no clear reason like it's Gary's mod, attacks sometimes ignore block, and enemies can block without blocking. This game sits in a strange difficulty valley where most enemies can either barely hit you or will perform an undodgeable one-shot on you. Generally they're pushovers, not simply because the combat tends to be rather easy, but mostly because this game has some of the worst AI I've ever seen in all of my years of gaming. There was just so much of this, you have no idea how abridged this montage was. The AI seemingly gets worse and worse as you get further into the game. They're almost blind and deaf in addition to having staggeringly awful pathfinding. They often get caught on locked doors, presumably trying to flee. There are numerous times in both of my playthroughs where I just caught them standing still, not responding even to being attacked from the front. I'm not sure what causes the AI to just utterly break down like this, but it is impressively bad nonetheless. So the dominant strategy in combat is basically just a circle strafe around opponents. They really struggle to hit you when you move at default speeds, so higher base speeds break this even harder. Jumping further compounds this, so if you're a melee character, all you need to do is quite literally run and jump circles around opponents. Enemies do hit hard, but since it's so easy to avoid attacks and the AI is awful, combat is often really trivial. You can often just run past encounters and be fine. This game has a dedicated shove button. I'd say it's like Dark Messiah's kick, but that's an insult to Dark Messiah. Bafflingly, enemies can survive 100-foot drops, so it's almost useless for the purposes you'd expect it to be useful for. It's at least good at stunning, but the missing potential really bothers me. There's an actually reasonable explanation from the developers about why this is the case, and I'm pulling your leg. It's because this game, unlike its enemies, can't stick a landing. The combat perk tree is a little weird, as the only perk that I view as truly vital is the very first one, which increases your melee attack speed. You can reasonably engage in melee combat and consistently win unscathed with just this perk alone. There's plenty of other worthwhile perks here, but this first one makes a huge immediate difference almost regardless of your overall build. These perks generally unlock new combat abilities such as sliding, special power attacks, parkouring, the ability to survive a lethal blow, etc. The mobility perks are among some of my favorites in the game, and they make the movement a lot more fun in general. If anything, they're the main draw to the combat tree. Most perks related to speed and agility are in the combat tree for some reason, and they have excellent synergy with the rogue tree. The double jump perk is good, but it's absurdly overpriced at 9 skill points, far more than any other perk in the game. You could probably just take the perks leading up to it and be better off for it. You can put those points elsewhere. There's a multitude of weapon types in this game, but they're barely different from each other, and most weapons in this game are swords anyways. I felt like there's almost no difference between short swords, long swords, maces, axes, and even hand-to-hand. Daggers are different, but not in a good way. They have awful damage and no power attack by default, requiring investment in the rogue perk tree to not be a pitiful joke. Late game daggers such as the baleful backstabber can be good, but it's a weapon type completely reliant on sneak attacks. Every other weapon type in the game is more consistently reliable, even axes, which don't really seem to see any love from the developers. This game considers bows to be a rogue's weapon, but I'll talk more about them here anyways. Bows are a little unintuitive. You always have a bow on you, it's the arrows you have to equip. This is actually kinda lame as it means you'll never get any interesting or unique bows. The damage output is pitiful and arrows in general only become more and more scarce as the game goes on. The primary enemies you fight in this game, skeletons, are resistant to arrows. So that's a brilliant design choice. Even rare arrows are just equivalent to flies in enemies' faces. Arrows are infinite if you grind for them, but they're uneconomical and they tend to hog up a lot of inventory space. Since they wanted to make bows as useless as possible, they require a late game rogue perk in order to be capable of headshotting. For the first time in action RPG history, stealth archery isn't the chosen way. To compound that, enemies get a lot more use out of bows than you can. Their aim is good, they'll likely two-shot you, and they can still fire arrows through a stun lock. Great game design. Oh yeah, and if you try and knock an arrow immediately after equipping your bow, you do this useless, time-wasting poke attack. Now, at no point in the game did I ever need this or want this. It's just there to waste your time. Shortly after your first combat encounter, the game introduces you to its best mechanic, runes. Runes represent the magic system of this game. You combine these runes in logical ways to create specific spells. So if you mix Berkanen, creation, and Kenaz, fire, you create a very literal fireball that you throw instead of shooting. It generally follows a consistent logic, and you'll need to observe consistencies in the spells the game does show you. It's actually a fairly neat system at a glance, and it's some of the most fun I had with this game. It was genuinely enjoyable and satisfying to discover new spells and get creative with them, especially since you can create or modify them on the fly. Among my favorites is Teleport, which you can easily learn during the main story. You can use Teleport to sequence break and access some very valuable items about a dozen hours early. I also created a spell that just double Berkanen, and it created lower level items. It was a pretty huge boost for my early game economy. You can also create a slowfall spell, called Flutter in this game, that allows you to bypass some areas and obstacles entirely. The fact that the game lets you do these things is a sign that there's a great game buried somewhere in here. At least, it is to me. But even this magic system struggles in terms of implementation at times. The most obvious problem is that mana doesn't regenerate on its own and can only be replenished by picking up these little orbs. Believe it or not, but without a perk, you can't see these. They're still present, just good luck finding them. Items that restore mana are absurdly rare, so you need to grind these orbs instead. Collecting these orbs is obnoxious and tedious thanks to their extremely tiny collision box and their sporadic spawning. In addition, you need to invest in the magic tree in order to cast even most basic spells without being temporarily cursed with the movement ability of a thalidomide baby. Evidently, most players ignore magic, judging from the fact that it's a small minority of people who have the 4 runestone spell achievement. I think this exhaustion mechanic is one of those reasons. It's an immediate turnoff from a magic system that's compounded by its deceptive complexity. A dedicated magician will suffer in ways that a more casual magician won't. The spellbook is organized by most recent rather than being in alphabetical order, for instance. This alone is rather obnoxious, but if you equip a spell as an extension of another spell, it brings that original spell up to the top too. I select a spell that creates a trap that summons a skeleton, and it brings my shield spell up to the top, solely because they both have the first 2 runes in common. You can't delete your spells and can only rename them. The most recent organization of the spellbook does mean that useless spells end up at the bottom, but why am I not allowed to clear out my spellbook? The Mage perk tree is overall good, but it's probably the most milquetoast of all of the trees. It mostly focuses on incremental upgrades, such as upgrades to the tier spell you can cast or your max mana. Not too many risks were taken here, and it has at least synergy with the other trees. However, a couple of the perks here are absurdly good. One perk doubles the effects of all items that boost your magical abilities, which is rather absurd when you have minus 40% casting cost for all spells already. Mana boosts are very useful as a rule of thumb, as all restoratives work on a percentage basis. Still, I found this tree overall kinda lackluster. It's fine, it does a job, but it's nowhere near as interesting as the other 2. Stealth is another playstyle / core mechanic in this game, and it's the one I have the least to say about. It's associated with the rogue tree, which is possibly the most versatile tree this game has on offer. Stealth works exactly how you'd expect. Crouching makes you harder to see, and staying in the shadows makes you even harder to see. With investment in the rogue tree, you can perform sneak attacks and backstabs. You also have access to water that can quench fire, both in bottled form and superglued to the end of arrows. Levels do account for stealth, and the detection meter is pretty generous, so it's completely viable. And a neat little detail, you can refill water bottles. Most players probably never noticed this since it's really niche. Stealth doesn't require too much in the way of investment to be useful, which is actually nice. They could have given your character the stealth capabilities of a marching band gangbang by default, but they didn't do that. It means it's still possible to ghost missions without outright being a rogue. If you put on some gear that boosts stealth, you're almost invisible. You can seemingly touch enemies and they just won't see you. Higher level enemies do tend to be more perceptive, but that's the only way the game ramps up the difficulty of stealth. The rogue skill tree focuses on things like stealth, traps, and adroit damage. Adroit damage is an esoteric, poorly explained damage type associated to sneak attacks, backstab, some other roguish things. I googled adroit and it turned out to be a synonym for cleverness, so I'm doing cleverness damage? Well, regardless, I think the rogue tree is the least consistent perk quality of the three trees by far, but what is potent is really potent. One perk here is Pounce, which causes you to silently do massive adroit damage whenever you land on top of an enemy based on how high you fell from. You can easily one-shot enemies by utilizing this in combination with things like jump height boost and slow fall. It's a perk with excellent synergy with perks from another skill tree, which is kind of the thing I'd like to see in these games, because it feels like a reward for versatility, for planning out your character and choosing your perks wisely. On the other hand, you have the perks related to traps, which make the very few traps present in the game in the first place do slightly less damage to you. There's also perks related to tripwires, but tripwires are absurdly rare and can only be used in specific contexts. They also require the AI to actually function in order to be used effectively. On the plus side, investing in the trap-sided tree allows you to take the lockpicking perk, which is the rogue's equivalent to the mage's teleport. Unfortunately, as far as I could tell, a warrior does not have such an analog. Going perfect stealth means you can mostly avoid this game's absolutely pea-brained item degradation mechanic. It's a bit of an aside, but I guess now is a pretty good time to discuss the mechanic in detail. Item degradation could be a good idea in an immersive sim, but I've never seen a game screw up the mechanic so badly before. Items degrade faster on a popular OnlyFans page. To compound that, fall damage and status effects such as bleeding or poison can destroy both your armor and weapons. However, legendary weapons and armor have unlimited durability, so once you start finding those about 8 or so hours in, the mechanic just fades away entirely. The durability mechanic is an attempt at emergent storytelling / gameplay, where you find yourself in a dangerous situation because your weapon broke in the middle of a battle. It's in line with the immersive sim design philosophy since improvisation is a cornerstone of the genre. The major issue is that there's also no way to repair your items, so you can't really get attached to any weapons. Non-legendary weapons break too quickly and the differences between them feel minute, but since legendary weapons can't break and are surprisingly common, you likely won't feel any real attachment for them either. You have a generous helping of weapon slots and half of all enemies seem to drop pristine bleached femurs, which, funny coincidence, is my adult movie name. Finally, item degradation ties into a later point that loot is awful for the former half of the game, but really ridiculous for the latter half. Ultimately, durability could have been a good, compelling mechanic, but with no way to repair your gear, the lack of differences between gear, and the absence of mechanic later on, it just ends up being one of the most half-baked ideas the game has on offer. This game has one more playstyle, at least one more it acknowledges officially. Environmental is a vaguely defined playstyle that is acknowledged in the menus but doesn't have its own perk tree. My best guess is that it primarily encompasses use of fire, traps, and physics. These are addressed through a mix of the three trees, so it's relatively easy to score a lot of points in this playstyle at the end of missions. Fire is one of the most interesting mechanics this game has on offer. You can set wooden items on fire and cause the fire to spread. It's actually pretty useful. It's one of this game's select few sparks of genius. It's a good idea that works as the developers intended. Or at least that's how it appears. You can use fire to destroy wooden structures, cook food, break doors, and clear up clutter. You have numerous ways to set things on fire, including that fireball spell I mentioned earlier. No torches though, they haven't been invented yet. The physics are absurd and just outright terrifying. Boards will go flying at absurd speeds and they will kill you. While setting fire to things may be fun, you have to be aware that the game struggles to handle it. The slowdown can rival the likes of a cave title. Ascendant is a cave game in the sense that it's full of caves. You can also use fire to cook food in an outright unfinished idea derived from the original Underworld games. Food is used to cure hunger, which is a really simple mechanic to just disable sprinting once you get hungry enough. That's all it does. Not all foods cure your hunger, so it's extremely obvious that this mechanic is unfinished. Even so, it's barely a problem. Weirdly, this game is incredibly stingy about what you can or can't cook. It's a simple set of rules. Mystery meat can be cooked, fish can't be cooked, root paste can be cooked, corn can't be cooked. Got it? I know you do. Physics in general are absolutely wonky in this game. Fire is a significant and obvious example of the wonkiness, with how absurdly fast heavy objects can get launched by the simple act of burning. The physics are so utterly wonky that the player can die from running into a door or prop too quickly. It did happen to me once, but I forgot to get a replay of the footage because I was just so flabbergasted. You'll have to take my word that it's royally screwed. One of the worst instances of the sheer wonkiness is the rope or chain climbing. I have absolutely no idea what is happening here, but my butt started to clench every time I grabbed onto a chain. The climbing seems to be physics-based. As a result, the chain can randomly get launched in a certain direction at the speed of a snail traveling 180 miles per hour, instantly killing you. Climbing is awkward in the first place, and it's often hard to get momentum before leaping off. So, in short, I have a very rational hatred of climbing in this game. Something else that really disappointed me is the throwing mechanic. For whatever reason, there's an insane arc to anything you throw. Without upgrades to your ability to throw objects, your character throws things like their arms have erectile dysfunction. You can't brawl like it's a game like Dark Messiah or anything like that, since the arc makes it almost impossible to hit anything moving. Perks make it a lot better at least, but that's just a band-aid on the wound. Stacking boxes or other physics objects is often presented as a way to navigate a level. You may need to use a box to help mantle up onto a higher surface, except because of the awful physics it's almost impossible to use this properly. You'll often kick the boxes all over the place sooner than you'll actually be able to climb up. It's proof that these physics make simple actions just infuriating chores. Invest in jumping or levitation instead of wearing yourself down like this. I should address the movement, as in how the player character feels to control and move around. The movement has potential to be good, but it's overall pretty bad in this game. The most obvious problem is that your default speed is slow. It's not like the slow movement speed in games like Condemned, where it makes sense in the context of a slower, more methodical game. You're going to be doing a lot of walking, running, sometimes platforming and sneaking in this game. Short of wearing multiple items that reduce movement speed, you're always fast enough to outmaneuver enemies. However, I guess the inherent stupidity of the AI makes it pretty easy, so it doesn't really matter. When I got items that boosted my movement speed, I found myself enjoying the game a good bit more. Heavier armor slows you down greatly, and the difference between 90% movement speed and 125% movement speed feels just a lot bigger than it sounds. Even if it's just for the sake of convenience, you may want to snatch the warrior perk that makes you sprint faster and jump higher. In addition, the strength-related perks seem to reduce movement speed penalties, which is something that the game doesn't have the courtesy to mention. Oh, also, if you move too fast, you can easily take the ends from touching physics objects. This game also has something I really like in theory, the mantling system. It lets you climb higher than you can jump, offers an extra degree of forgiveness in platforming, and adds a lot more verticality to the game in general. It works, but it has one awful inclusion, auto-mantling. If you walk up to a waist-high wall or object, you will automatically mantle it. It causes you alerts forward without your own input. It's awful, and it actually killed me a handful of times. To cap off my discussion of the movement, I want to address the fact that the movement feels slippery and stilted. It's really hard to convey to someone without them actually playing the game themselves. It feels like you're a human pinball at times, bouncing off of tiny physics objects and flying off of small inclines. Auto-mantle doesn't help and just adds to the slipperiness. Precision movement is difficult, which isn't as bad as it sounds since precision is never necessary. You're mostly going to be sprinting, flying, and circle strafing all over the place anyways. The best part of the movement ends up being the abilities that help negate it. Mages can fly over everything, acrobats can jump and float over everything. That's just weird to me, and it speaks volumes to the quality of the movement in this game. Wall running is pretty fun though. Let's take a quick break from the gameplay to talk about visuals and sound design. The visuals are serviceable to subpar, especially from a technical standpoint. There are some environments that have some really good direction here and there. Pretty cemeteries, crystal caves, lava falls, tombs, you name it. The biggest problem with the visuals is the inherent fact that the game takes place underground. For every interesting set piece, there's about a dozen blank caves or stone corridors. I do like this game's palette overall. It starts off very purple and blue and slowly turns orange and black. The game is rather dark even if the brightness turned up a little bit, so you need to keep one of this game's overly tinted lamps around, which sometimes come in weapon form. Ultimately, I have no major complaints about the art direction itself. Technically, the visuals are subpar. I did set my settings on high, but I still felt that the textures look a little too blurry at times. It's one of those games that looks okay at a glance, but if you squint or get close, it starts looking rather ugly. Lighting is glitched in some places, you can sometimes see the thin veneer between realities, and some textures have this weird warping effect to them. Plus, this game stutters a lot. It wasn't constant, but there were some areas that would stutter or greatly dip in frame rate. It's just not optimized very well. Consistent stuttering often correlated with the AI completely breaking down, but it could just be a coincidence. Also, as I mentioned before, fire causes massive slowdown. The enemy designs are generally subpar to me. They're not overtly bad, but they feel so generic and uninspired. Most enemies are these dark skeletons, some of which give off a cloud of dust so thick that it makes it nearly impossible to see them. At least these skeletons have a sense of belonging though. The rest of the enemies in this game have a very asset store feel to them, like they just seemingly don't belong in there in the first place. I'm really not sure what's going on here. Here's a Mind Crippler. There's only one of these things in the entire game, and it sees no fanfare whatsoever. They do a unique damage type that you can acquire immunity to, but for obvious reasons you really shouldn't care. So, what about the sound design? Well, unfortunately for the audio freaks, I don't really have much to talk about here. There's very little that stood out to me among the sound design, and almost everything that did stand out was for negative reasons. Hits in combat don't sound meaty or powerful enough. Rippers, these trees monsters, have one pain sound and they can make it really quickly. The sounds of fire can get incredibly obnoxious in some areas because of how loud it is. I also felt that this game didn't have enough sounds for magic because it got really old hearing the same exact sound on a less than minutely basis across a 20-hour playthrough. Music in this game is outright forgettable. I felt like I heard this game's combat soundtrack for about a third of my entire playthrough, often because it glitched and kept playing outside of combat, and I still can't remember it at all. Were I not planning on writing a review for this game and gathering footage for it, I would have just forgotten this game had music at all. Rather lame, seeing as this genre has had some pretty killer soundtracks in the past in games like Deus Ex or System Shock 2. The sound mixing can be really awful at times. A handful of sounds are simply far, far too loud relative to all other sounds. Magic, fire, and the death sound are the primary examples that come to mind. I'm going to show you some of these. Sudden loud sounds ahead, so brace your ears. The level design does account for the skills and abilities you can acquire, but not always. A major problem is that most levels are very linear. When they do open up, it's typically a large circular arena with a big structure in the middle. So you're often funneled along a series of corridors for a while before the level opens up for one large arena. Most other games of the genre are more open-ended, often having an interconnected level design. Here, areas in the level are typically just completely branching off with no quick or convenient ways between major areas. A lot of games in this genre feature shortcuts and circularly navigable level design because they help the player get around. They offer more choices to the player and make the levels feel more organic. This game is just very linear in comparison. To this game's credit, however, there are quite a few optional areas to explore. Some of the later levels you barely need to look at half the maps in order to complete their main quests. Exploring these levels can genuinely be lucrative, and some builds will have a much easier time accessing secrets than others. Plus, some levels do have a genuine sense of verticality to them. Again, it's another reason to run a mage or an acrobat. A mage can ascend in 15 seconds what a warrior would take 5 minutes to ascend. The only thing this game really secrets away is legendary items, though. You'll never find like new shortcuts or alternative routes. So while exploring is incentivized and there is a tangible reward for it, I feel like it's pretty minor most of the time. There are more than a handful of times where I found a secret away chest, and when I looked inside it was just like 10 gold and 2 broken items. I'll talk more about the problems with loot later. I guess since it's relevant to level design, I should quickly address the hub. It's really boring. There's almost no NPCs here aside from some faction representatives who do nothing, the skill point trader, and some vendors. Unless I missed something, the only NPC that is added to this area as you progress is the Arcane Bazaar merchant. There's nothing to explore here aside from an out-of-the-way area with petty loot inside that can only be opened during the final mission. The hub is so meaningless in the grand scheme of things that it's almost pointless. I think the game would be outright better if each dungeon had its own vendors, and you could exchange skill points for perks from the menu at any time. I guess the hub is a safe place to experiment with new abilities and spells, but that's really it. If you die, you go all the way back to the start of the level, often with your equipment damaged. Enemies did not respawn and items remain in place, so it's basically just a warp back to the start of the level. If you don't save often or exploit this death teleportation, you may need to do tons of backtracking and retreading. Look at how far back I was sent by automantling to my death. I'm not going to encounter anything on the way back to where I died, so it's almost pointless. Eventually I started to use death as a quick way to travel to the hub portal, so I guess that's something. Death has no real consequence except wasting your time, especially later on. In fact, death is often beneficial because of how much in the way of time and resources it can save you. For obvious reasons, this is very questionable game design. This game has side quests, which are so weak and soulless that they're nearly indistinguishable from the main quest. Almost every quest in this game is a fetch quest or kill 5 skeletons quest with no strings attached. Without the level design or even story at least make these fetch quests interesting, there's basically nothing to them. The whole main quest is about gathering 7 keys to stop the ancient evil, so of course it's not going to be very interesting. Side quests do have some genuine value because they sometimes reward you with legendary items or massive gold payouts, but that's all they have going for them. You can save scum to get these quests since they change whenever you load a save. Above all else, quests seem like a half-hearted justification to get you from place to place and to extend this game's meager runtime. The side quests boost your reputation with the 3 factions, which doesn't matter at all. You can buy some unique legendary items with high reputation, but they're generally mediocre and not really worth all the time investment. Also, you can unlock a merchant who, by default, sells a ton of legendary items. I had a genuinely hard time telling the factions apart because they're so undeveloped. You don't even get to truly interact with members of these factions at all. You don't encounter members of these factions, you don't get to talk to anyone, you don't really learn their ideology or anything like that. It's so weird. Their only roles in the game are just being faceless quest givers and offering merchandise. And that's it. The worst instance of level/quest design in the whole game is probably the final boss level. Well-equipped maids can immediately float their way to the end of the level and two-shot the final boss, who is just a glorified turret. Honest to goodness, I thought that was all there was to it, but in reality, I had unintentionally skipped the entire level, which was supposed to be a gauntlet of sorts. While I do like the jankery with magic, could they have not idiot-proofed the final boss? Even my acrobat had an easy time, as enemies just stood still and made the bare minimum amount of effort to catch him. I've put off the inventory system for long enough, so I have to address that now. You don't have very many inventory slots, and picking up loot can rapidly fill your inventory. Keen-eyed viewers may have noticed something about my inventory at some point. There's an empty backpack slot. This backpack slot will never be filled by the average player. Wanna know why? It's because only Kickstarter backers are given access to the backpack. That's not a joke. You need to have participated in this game's Kickstarter in order to have a backpack or a pet. That's a straight up insidious. As far as I'm aware, there's no way around this. A really, really fundamental problem is that this game doesn't tell you the stats of weapons. It has no problems giving you the ratings of armor, so why doesn't it tell you the damage of weapons? Your only gauge of the power of weapons is their value. Naturally, a sword that costs 3,000 silver is going to be much more powerful than a sword that costs 50 silver. But how else can you know this? How much stronger is it? Item scaling doesn't seem to be that significant, so the price variance is almost exponential in comparison to more logarithmic change in power. While price is an indicator of stats, uber expensive weapons aren't really that much more powerful. I don't really know what they're going for with this. Did they want to encourage players to experiment? Maybe they're trying to hide something? I don't think I'll ever know. Loot in this game is all over the place. Early on, it'll be very common that you find a secreted chest, open it, and find 10 silver and some broken low-level gear. Later on, random enemies will casually drop weapons that sell for several thousand silver. It's a bit like Oblivion's baffling scaling system. I got to a point where I was accumulating so much valuable legendary gear that I started to pass on a lot of it. Silver goes from being insanely scarce, barely scrounging up 50 to purchase a better weapon, to having about 50,000 that you don't know what to do with. This feels like it just happens at the drop of a hat. It's not gradual at all. Then, well, this happens.
Time passes with typical calamity.
The game says this quest should reward you 15,000 silver, but it actually gives you 150,000. Not the first time an extra zero is completely broken a game I've played. To your advantage, items respawn in zones where you've already cleared the main quest. Enemies and legendary items do respawn, so you can go back and grind some good gear, if only for their sell value. By the way, there are feats for buying and selling gear. You can get the feats from buying or selling from any merchant, despite the fact that the game only lists one merchant in the feat description. Really good polished game we got going here. There's no mercantile perks in this game, which I'm surprised by. I'd think that they'd try and capitalize on that. As it stands, there's no way to get better prices. Even faction standing doesn't seem to have any effect on the prices you get. I would complain more about this, but because I accumulated such a massive fortune by the end of the game, I guess it just doesn't matter. Like I said a little bit ago, I stopped picking up items outright later on because I had such a massive fortune that I didn't know where to spend. I'd already acquired all the items that were useful for my build by that point, so that much money was completely pointless. Being able to purchase a legendary item should feel rewarding, but once you realize how badly the economy breaks, it no longer feels rewarding. When I bought my expensive legendary maid's gear, I felt accomplished. It was a reward for exploring, accumulating cash, and unlocking the arcane bazaar. Several hours later, I realized it was a little more than an illusion, and I was able to buy my whole set a dozen times over. Working to acquire better equipment is part of the fun in a game like this, but with this game it ends up being superficial. This game suffers from the problem that plagues most modern immersive sims, and is that the player becomes far too powerful at the endgame. These games often start you off as an average Joe, and end with you being a slayer of gods. I can't really hold this one against Ascendant. These games often struggle to accommodate for the player's accumulation of power, skill, and resources across the breadth of a 20 or so hour long game. Enemies and fights can only be so difficult if you want to accommodate for stealth, combat, memes like unarmed, and more. This power creep feels very abrupt in Ascendant, whereas it's a lot more gradual in most other modern immersive sims. Now I've discussed a lot of the core gameplay and its quirks, I want to refresh my points on the feat system and introduce some new points. A lot of perks in this game are genuinely well designed, but their value can be questionable at times. The most expensive perk in the game requires 9 points, and it just lets you double jump. It's at the end of a branching chain of perks too, so it technically costs 21 points in total. While it is a very good perk, it's proof that the cost of some of these perks is straight up bizarre. You can get 3 more perks for the same cost as double jumping. Even though the perks are more clever and unique than average, there's still a lot of perks that are poor investments. With somewhat scarce perk points, you can't get too inventive with your build, especially if you go stealth or mage. Taking a risky perk will always come at the cost of far more vital and useful perks. If you go for something very specific and commit to it, you can potentially lock yourself out of a lot of perk points. Once again, there's a lot fewer feats for a mage to accomplish than a warrior, so a mage would need to be more focused. In a sense, this discourages players from being versatile, which is something the game is trying so hard to encourage players to be in the first place. There's also a huge issue that isn't immediately obvious at a glance, which is why I've put it off for so long. It's one of the worst instances of game design on display here. Perks have requirements that are often more than just owning the previous perk in their branch, but the game never tells you these requirements. A notable example of this garbage fire is the warrior perk Mythical Might, which you can only acquire if you have 8 specific skills within a certain handful of branches split between both the warrior and rogue trees. How would you ever figure this out on your own? Similarly, the rogue tree has a perk that allows bows to headshot, which requires perks in the warrior tree. You unlock a perk in the rogue tree by investing in perks in the warrior tree. Do I need to clarify why that's just straight up stupid? Especially since it isn't communicated to the player at all? Well, many perks also require you to be an arbitrary amount of days into the game. This is such an unbelievable mess that I would highly suggest using a guide. And it doesn't stop there. There's one more layer to this, and it's a lack of consistency. If a perk's icon is just grayed out, that means you can take it once you have the perk prior to it. If the icon shows a lock, it means that you need to meet further requirements beyond the previous perk. The problem is, the game is not consistent with this. The open lock skill was a pretty prime example. In the case of this skill, the only requirement is a perk before it, but it always shows the padlock icon, so I thought I had to do something else to unlock it, but nope, it can be taken immediately after the useless perk before it. Thanks to Flare on Steam for writing such a detailed guide on this mind-bogglingly stupid system. Documentation on this game is very limited in general, so I'm glad that this was something someone mapped out. Your sacrifice will be remembered forever, Flare. We will forever ponder if you lost your sanity to the Lovecraftian monster that is this game. And this game is absolutely filled with minor inconveniences that all just add up. Chests will sometimes close on their own while you're looting them. Merchants can only buy so many items regardless of how much silver they have. You can't save when within a certain distance from enemies. Water up to your feet prevents you from sneaking. There's no easy way between most levels, and so on. These minor problems add up with all the major problems to create an experience that can be mind-numbingly tedious at times. Alright, I've been very negative up to this point, so I want to try putting a cherry on this fecal sundae. I've already mentioned I like the magic system and fire, so these will be more minor things. Every weapon has a unique model, and some weapons have unique models depending on their level of durability. Broken weapons actually do visually appear broken, a very excellent touch that makes the durability system a lot more interesting than the waste it really is. It's little bits of flavor that make mechanics like this a lot more interesting, even though durability is awful in this game. Magic gear is interesting. Weapons almost never have a bland effect like 20 points of fire damage on strike or something like that. It's a lot more gimmicky. I found one sword I quite liked that had very high base damage but also had a high chance of missing outright. Fun bit of Morrowind just tossed in there. Magic armor almost always has a potent enchantment, and mages get a perk that double the effect of all major-related enchantments. It's generally worth seeking out magic gear that suits your character, though swords are still very severely overrepresented. The UI is like that of older, more traditional immersive sims. It's a bit simplified in comparison to, say, System Shock 2, as items occupy static slots here. Still, the UI, especially the inventory, was designed with a mouse in mind. This is a plus for me, as I'm a bit of a mouse and keyboard elitist. They got Stephen Russell, possibly one of the most spectacular voice actors in gaming. He's voiced Garrett in Thief, Corvo in Dishonored 2, Nick Valentine in Fallout 4, and many more. He's the only real voice talent this game has, voicing the only real character this game has.
Hurry, Ascendant! Quickly! Typhon's forces threaten to overrun Mark Hall. They have taken Pluto's gate.
Hilariously, this game does not show up on his IMDb page, and his presence is not advertised on the game's Steam page either. We'll get to that later. You can manually set your respawn point using an item known as a silver sapling, which you can plant in designated dirt piles. It automatically restores itself in your inventory, so there's no need to worry about losing it or wasting it. I didn't really use it, but I do appreciate its inclusion. There is a teleporter that goes straight from the deepest dungeon you've unlocked straight to the hub. It's a very welcome convenience, as you would otherwise have to sit through about 5 loading screens to get back to the final dungeon. There's an FOV slider. Yeah. Admittedly, this last compliment is a bit backhanded, but developers clearly tried to shoehorn some emergent gameplay mechanics in just for the heck of it. The most obvious example are the slugs. Feed one a ripper poem, its trail becomes flammable. Feed it an eyeless netherfish, its trail becomes darkness. Yes, that darkness effect is intentional and not a glitch. It's really not all that interesting or useful of a mechanic, but they tried. Sometimes this game does deliver on its immersive sim mechanics quite well. In the first actual dungeon in the game, Upper Erebus, there's this blocked off entryway that leads to a large chunk of the level. You have a lot of ways to break into it. While you won't have access to some of these the first time around, the game does send you back here later on. This here is player agency. I'm presented with a blocked off entryway, and it's up to me and my build to decide how I want to bypass it. Also, Upper Erebus is one of the very few levels in the game with any interconnected elements to it, so that's nice. Destroy without killing, huh? I'm sure I can do that. Let's exit the game for a little bit to address the deception on the game's Steam store page and the problems with the Kickstarter. Much like Todd Howard, this game overpromises and blatantly fails to deliver on its promises. Become embroiled in an epic plot as rival factions vie for dominance and struggles that ebb and flow across the realm. The decisions you make have consequences on events in the world around you. This is what psychologists call a lie. In no way do the factions ever come into play in game outside of a rare ally to rescue, and I wasn't even sure if rescuing them did anything. There are no choices to make beyond how you build your character. You can join a single faction, but the only real consequences this has is that you can only buy the legendary item from the faction that you side with. By the way, you don't actually get a choice, you're just automatically forced to join a faction once you have high enough reputation with them. It's woefully underdeveloped. This dynamic enemy spawning and degrading world part is rather dumb too. Enemy spawn positions are seemingly chosen from a small set of random possibilities, so I wouldn't exactly call it dynamic. Enemies supposedly get harder as you progress due to a pseudo timer placed on the game, but you can reverse it pretty easily using a Lich core, which aren't hard to get. I honestly couldn't really tell a difference between the timer being half full and 1 pip full. This claim is a lot more minor, but one of the advertising points is interacting with useful flora. There are no plants to pick in this game aside from ripper poems. There's no alchemy system or anything like that. Most of the supposed flora is exclusively found in pots and boxes, hilariously. The few items that could be considered flora are likely to poison you, so even useful is a bit of a lie. Set out on more than 70 quests! Sure, but only in the sense that Skyrim's Radiant quest means that Skyrim has an unlimited number of quests. Between the main quest and the very few unique quests I found, which were always rescue missions by the way, there's probably 20 quests that aren't effectively randomly generated in total. This one screenshot they use is very deceptive. Why is it so much more visually pleasant than actual Magic UI? It's less homogeneous in a good way, and the spell list looks far less cluttered. It's so much better than what's actually in the game, it's kind of astonishing. Oh yeah, I guess I've neglected to mention it up to this point, but my mage did not find 2 of the runes. If they're hidden somewhere, they're really well hidden. If you ask me, wouldn't you want to give the player all of the runes early on, so that they can experiment properly? So that they have access to the full Spellmaker's toolkit? I checked into the merchant pretty regularly and never found them, so who knows. Just another drop in the bad game design ocean. This game started life in 2015. In 2016, it was publicized as a Kickstarter project from Other Side Entertainment, who were headed by Paul Neurath, the founder of the renowned Looking Glass Studios. Also involved in development was Warren Spector, a legendary name in immersive sim fandom, mostly because he quite literally invented the genre. Many of the other developers were ex-Looking Glass, so this game had some genuine talent behind it. Ascendant is technically the 3rd game in the Ultimate Underworld series, but due to some copyright struggles with EA, they were allowed to use a universe but not the name of the series. The original Ultimate Underworld games are highly influential and are often cited as the original immersive sims. As a result, there was a considerable niche interest in Underworld Ascendant. Its Kickstarter raised $860,356, exceeding its goal of $600,000. Evidently, this was far from good enough. Ascendant released 2 years and 2 months after the original estimated release date of September 2016. They paywalled content and items using the Kickstarter and are yet to make them accessible to people like me who never cared. The development for this game seemingly consisted of feature creep and overshooting what was possible for a small, relatively low-budget studio. I think the release date of September 2016 was unrealistic in the first place, so I can only wonder what the game would have looked like if it released then. While looking at the Kickstarter page, I noticed that on February 2nd of 2021, they announced that they had finally shipped all pre-order bonuses. Only took them 2 years and 4 months. This game received a major patch several months after its release, but the damage was already done. One innovative feature included in this patch? A functional save system. Even now, with all the bug fixes and changes to the core gameplay made by this patch, the game still has an unfinished feel to it. Indeed, at some point, this game was much worse. Probably need another half a year in the oven. You've already delayed it by 2 years, so what's another half a year? This game didn't exactly see warm reception upon launch, and it will forever be haunted by the abysmal state it was released in. Sure, they fixed a good few problems, but they couldn't fix everything. You can only patch up a turd so much without also forgetting to polish it afterwards. Oh yeah, so Other Side is making System Shock 3. I wonder how that's Oh! I guess it's time to begin my closing thoughts. So, what ultimately frustrates me the most about Underworld Ascendant is the fact that the potential is there. They had the fundamental ideas of the immersive sim right, but the game ultimately ends up being a miasma of unrefined mechanics, good ideas poorly implemented, and awful inconveniences that slowly eat at your sanity. I had fun with this game at some points. I felt some of the same spark that I got out of titles that inspired it at times, but these tend to be fleeting moments. After feeling clever for solving a puzzle or encountering an unconventional way, I proceed to go back to the tedium of mediocre combat, dull level design, and mindless quests. In fact, something I realized while writing this was that I ended up making characters who were good at avoiding this game's level design and combat, a mage who flew past everything, and an acrobat who ran and jumped over everything. So, what is my final consensus on Underworld Ascendant? Well, it might surprise you after all I've said, but I had a good time with it about a third of the time. It's still an immersive sim, it has all the bells and whistles that I expect out of a game of the genre. I'm admittedly rather easy to please with these since we get so few of them. Ascendant has many great ideas, a handful of good moments, and it generally does offer the player some fun and clever ways to resolve their problems. But you know what Ascendant also has an abundance of? A lack of polish. I think of moments where I did something clever or interesting using the tools in my arsenal in inventive and potent ways, but then I immediately think of moments where an out-of-the-box solution outright didn't work as it felt it should. Why bother shoving enemies when they don't seem to take much, if any, fall damage? Why should a non-mage engage with magic if they are actively punished for it? Why are tripwires and rare arrows almost completely useless? How come this game doesn't have explosives of any kind? There's so much missing potential that often feels like it wouldn't be hard to fix. Ascendant isn't a skeleton of a game, and I'd argue that there are other more popular immersive sims that are less in-depth overall, such as Invisible War. The thing is, Ascendant often fails to capitalize on this depth and elaborate on it. Between the moments of actual depth and cleverness is a fairly generic hack-and-slash dungeon crawler not immediately identifiable on the surface level as an immersive sim. If the dozens of inconveniences, problems, and seemingly absent features in this game were ironed out, you'd have a genuinely great game on your hands. Of course, it goes without saying that if a game's flaws are fixed, it would be a good game. I'll reiterate once more, Ascendant shows promise, and I think that's what's most unfortunate about it. Missing potential is sad to me, and I think this is one of the most egregious cases of it I've ever seen. So ultimately, this game sits in a very strange place for me. I'm highly biased towards games of the genre, but it still might be the worst immersive sim ever made. Far from the worst game ever made, not even close, but Ascendant has tons of critical flaws. I'm not even going to give this game a numeric score since it sits in such an odd place for me. Any score I could give it would be piggybacking off my own biases in addition to my love for the immersive sim elements, a magic system, above average perk design, and the fire mechanics. There's something here, but it's filtered through a scuffed up lens of mediocrity, jank, and lack of polish. I wouldn't recommend this game to the average person, but if you're very hungry for a new immersive sim, you can snatch this game on Steam for $7.50 now and then. It's a risky purchase owing to this game's lack of polish. You can't get it on GOG after all. I can't help but respect its ambition, and there are things to have fun with here, but there's a lot of obscure or indie immersive sims that are more deserving of your attention. There's been a pretty massive resurgence of the genre in recent memory, and I think this game's gonna be forgotten pretty quickly. I guess the people who got burned by it won't be forgetting it anytime soon, but I guess that's just the way it is. That's it for this episode. Tune in next time for more. Wait. I'm here after recording all my lines and editing most of this video, realizing I never addressed the ending. What else would be a more appropriate way to end this video? After you defeat the final boss, who is a stationary turret, you're forced to betray Stephen Russell, which does something, and that prevents Gargamel from waking up and conquering Smurf Village. Maybe I should have read the lore, but the game also should have convinced me to care. The antagonist is borderline an abstraction. He never appears, it's not clear what he's doing, there's minimal sense of urgency, and he pops in to taunt you now and then, but that's it. The turret you fight isn't even him, it's some lich he summoned. What a villain. You then get a really boring slideshow telling us where all these characters and factions we totally cared about are now. Stephen Russell swears revenge on us, and that's it. In all fairness, this is accurate to most other immersive sims. 20 or more hours of gameplay for a brief 30-second ending. Arcane's Prey and original Deus Ex are two of the best games ever made, but they both have endings that are about a minute long. Good on you, Underworld Ascendant. You copied games that are far better than you could ever dream of being. There's nothing quite like capping off a subpar game with a subpar ending. Alright, that's everything. For real this time. I think my video may be the longest and most in-depth review of this game on the internet right now. I found a review that claimed to be an hour long, but it seemed more like a weird improvised analytical let's play. This status could change in time, and someone else could come along and, I don't know, toss their English class essay about how bad the story is in there too. I prefer to focus on gameplay anyways. Tune in next time for more weird, obscure, or controversial games. Bye-bye.